Most people feel fine on day 1. They open the pantry. They light a candle. They check their phone. They think, this will be back on by morning. And it usually is. Most outages in the United States last fewer than 8 hours. You barely notice. You find the flashlight. You order food. You go to sleep. And by the time you wake up, the refrigerator is humming again, and everything goes back to the way it was. But not always. On August 14th, 2003, a software alarm failure at a single control room in Ohio triggered a cascade of failures that no one caught in time. Within seconds, according to the New York ISO, the organization responsible for managing New York's power grid, the lights flickered and went out. And they did not come back on for 2 days. For some people, 4 days. 55 million people across 8 states and the province of Ontario lost power in what remains the largest blackout in North American history. The New York City subway shut down mid-ride. ATMs went dark. Gas stations ran out of fuel by day 2 because the pumps are electric. Hospitals ran on generators until some of those generators failed. Residents of high-rise buildings in New York City were left without running water because, as the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene documented in a peer-reviewed report, their water supply depends on electric pumps. When the power goes out in a tall building, the water stops moving too. Almost 100 people died. And in the summer of 2024, Houston, Texas, watched it happen again. Hurricane Beryl made landfall on July 8th as a Category 1 storm and knocked out power for more than 6 million customers. According to reporting from the Texas Tribune, hundreds of thousands of people were still without electricity a full week after landfall. Temperatures hit the low 90s. The heat index pushed triple digits. A woman in a rural county died when her home oxygen machine ran out of battery after the power failed. Another person died of heat in Matagorda County. At least 11 people were killed in connection with the storm and the days that followed. Residents who had never thought of themselves as particularly unprepared found themselves sleeping in their cars with the engine running for the air conditioning, taking cold showers at 2 in the morning, and realizing that the things they assumed they had, the items they thought were covered, were not. This video is not about the first 6 hours of a blackout. You probably know what to do in the first 6 hours. You find the flashlight. You keep the refrigerator closed. You wait. This video is about day 3, or day 4. It is about the point when you have already eaten everything that was easy to eat, when the candles are getting low, when your children are asking questions you do not have answers to, and when you start realizing that the things still mattering, the things you actually need, are the ones you never fully prepared for. These are 9 of them, and by the time you get to the first one, you may realize that the most important thing you can have after 72 hours without power was never a physical item at all. Number 9 is water. Not the concept of water. The actual physical stored water that you put somewhere in your home before anything happened. This sounds obvious. It sounds like the thing everyone already knows, and that is exactly why it belongs at number 9, not number 1. Because the illusion that you have this covered is more dangerous than admitting you do not. FEMA and the CDC both recommend a minimum of 1 gallon of water per person per day. Ready.gov, the official federal preparedness resource, specifies the same figure. For a family of 4, that is 12 gallons for a 3-day minimum. And FEMA updated its guidance following Hurricane Katrina to recommend at least 2 weeks of self-sufficiency, meaning 28 gallons for that same family of 4. That is before you account for a dog, a baby, anyone who is sick, or the fact that temperatures in Houston in July can push your actual water need to double the baseline. Most people do not have that. Most people have a few bottles in the pantry and a full tap. And the tap is the problem. The 2003 blackout in New York City revealed something that surprised a lot of people who lived in apartment buildings. Their water stopped working. Not because the water system failed, but because the pumps that push water to upper floors are electric. The moment the grid went down, so did the pressure. Residents who assumed running water was a utility that existed independently of electricity discovered that assumption was wrong. The city's Department of Health documented this failure in an official report and identified it as one of the most serious consequences of the blackout for urban residents. On a well system in a rural area, the same thing happens. Your pump is electric. When the power goes out, so does your water. You may have a pressure tank that holds some reserve, but it empties within a few flushes. This means water is not the boring preparedness item it is usually framed as. It is the one with a hard deadline. You will stop being able to flush your toilet. You will stop being able to cook with tap water. You will not be able to clean wounds. You will not be able to make formula if you have an infant. The mistake people make is storing water in large, single containers that are hard to manage. The better practice is distributing smaller sealed containers, 1-gallon jugs or commercially sealed water pouches, in multiple locations, so that if one area of the home is inaccessible, you are not relying on a single point of failure. And block ice, not cubed ice, is what professionals use for extended outages. It melts significantly slower and can extend the cold life of a cooler from 2 days to 4. 3 days of stored water per person. Then you start solving the water problem. If you have not already, by day 3 you are behind. Number 8 is a manual can opener. This one has a particular kind of embarrassment attached to it. People who discover they need one and do not have one do not like talking about it. But the number of households that stock canned food and do not own a functioning manual can opener is real, and it becomes a problem the moment the power goes out and the electric opener on the counter goes with it. This is not a theoretical scenario. Preparedness resources compiled in the aftermath of extended outages consistently flag the manual can opener as one of the most common missing items. The issue is that modern kitchens have largely replaced them with electric models, and many people who own a manual can opener have not tested it in years. The blade is dull, the mechanism is corroded, or it was moved to a drawer no one opens anymore. A can of black beans has enough protein to be a meaningful meal. A can of tuna, a can of chicken, a can of soup. These are the backbone of a non-refrigerated 3-day food supply, but they are worthless if you cannot open them. And trying to improvise a way to open a can without a tool, in low light, with children watching, is the kind of small humiliation that lands differently than you expect. There is a specific design consideration worth knowing here. The single-wheel military-style P-38 can opener, the one originally issued to U.S. soldiers with C rations, is about 1.5 inches long, costs under $2, and opens every standard can. It is slower than a full-size model but weighs almost nothing and lasts decades. Professional preparedness trainers recommend keeping one in a wallet or attached to a keychain, and a full-size model in the kitchen drawer. Not the emergency kit in the closet. The kitchen drawer, because the kitchen drawer is the first place you look, and in day 3 of a blackout, you are not navigating with the same precision you normally would. Number 7 is cash. This one is specifically about day 3, not day 1. On day 1, most people still have some cash somewhere. By day 3, the pattern that emerges in every major extended outage is that small bills become one of the most valuable things you can possess. When the power goes out, electronic payment systems stop working. This is not a matter of network issues or software problems. The card readers at gas stations, convenience stores, and corner groceries are electric. The ATMs are electric. The digital registers are electric. Some businesses open their doors anyway and operate on pen and paper transactions, accepting only cash and only small bills, because they cannot make change from a 50 if their register is down. This happened in Detroit during the 2003 Northeast Blackout. It happened in Houston during Hurricane Beryl. It happened in New Orleans after Katrina. In every case, the pattern is identical. Within 24 hours of an extended outage, cash holders have options and card holders do not. The CVS manager photographed at his Detroit store on the afternoon of August 14th 2003, ran a manual operation from the front door, accepting only cash and only for essential items. People who did not have cash went home without supplies. The Federal Reserve and Financial Preparedness Guidance consistently recommend keeping small denomination bills at home, specifically 1s, 5s, and 10s, not 20s. A 20 at a cash-only counter during a crisis requires change that the cashier may not have. Having $15 in small bills is worth more than a $100 bill in this situation. The recommended amount varies, but the principle is the same across sources. Enough small bills to cover 2 to 3 days of basic purchases at convenience store prices. Bottled water, batteries, ice, basic food. This is not savings. This is the functional equivalent of knowing where the physical key is when the electronic lock goes down. Number 6 is a battery-powered or hand-crank weather radio. Your cell phone will work for part of this, then it will not. This is the thing that catches people off guard on day 2 and 3. They managed day 1 because their phone still had charge. They used their car to charge it. But cell towers depend on backup power systems, and those systems are not unlimited. In the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl in Houston, multiple cell towers in affected areas went down not because of physical damage, but because their backup batteries ran out after sustained high-traffic use during an extended outage. The very period when you most need information is the period when the systems delivering that information are most likely to fail. No AA weather radio transmits continuously on dedicated frequencies that do not depend on the internet, on cell towers, or on grid power. A hand crank model generates its own power. A battery model with fresh batteries will run for days on a single set. Either version gives you access to real-time emergency alerts, storm updates, evacuation orders, and boil water notices. The kind of official information that determines whether you stay where you are or leave, whether you can drink the water coming out of your tap or cannot. During the 2003 Northeast Blackout, New York's mayor issued a boil water advisory for parts of the city because the loss of power to pumping stations created the risk of contamination in the water system. Residents who heard about it in time boiled water. Residents who did not found out later. The difference between knowing and not knowing in that situation is not abstract. The radio is also a morale item, which matters more on day 3 than it does on day 1. By day 3, the silence is heavy. Kids are bored. Adults are anxious. A human voice delivering organized information, even bad news delivered clearly, is stabilizing in ways that the internet does not replicate. There is something about the steady frequency of an official broadcast that reminds you that the situation is being managed, that it is not purely chaos, that there are people trying to restore what was lost. A hand-crank weather radio is $15 at most hardware stores. It is one of the single highest return preparedness investments on this list. Number 5 is a first aid kit that is actually stocked. The box is not the point. Most households have a box. The box has 3 bandages, an expired packet of ibuprofen, and a roll of gauze that has been in there since before the current decade. That is not a first aid kit. That is a box that creates the feeling of having a first aid kit. In an extended power outage, the probability of a minor injury rises significantly. This is not a dramatic statement. It is a documented pattern. People are moving around in low light. They are carrying things they do not normally carry, using tools they do not normally use, dealing with ice, dealing with generators, dealing with gas stoves that they may be using for warmth in ways that they were not designed for. The CPSC and NFPA have both documented spikes in accidental injuries during extended outages, including burns, lacerations, and carbon monoxide incidents. The specific items that matter most in a post-outage first aid kit, according to the Red Cross and FEMA guidance, go beyond bandages, a thermometer that does not require a battery, or at minimum has its own long-life battery, antiseptic wipes, sterile gauze pads in multiple sizes, medical tape, tweezers, scissors, a cold pack, nitrile gloves, and a CPR face shield. Pain relief. Acetaminophen and ibuprofen needs to be present in quantities sufficient for at least 5 days of regular household use, not just a single dose. The prescription medication issue deserves its own moment, as Reuters documented in its coverage of the 2003 Northeast Blackout. Pharmacies were closed throughout the affected region. People with diabetes who needed insulin, a refrigerated medication, were in immediate danger. People who depended on other daily medications ran short because pharmacies could not process prescriptions without electronic systems. FEMA now recommends maintaining a minimum 7-day supply of any prescription medication at all times, and the agencies that manage Medicare and Medicaid have documented the specific dangers of medication interruption during multi-day outages. Many insulins can be kept at room temperature for a limited period, typically 28 days for an open vial, according to the FDA, though this varies by formulation. But that is an important distinction. Room temperature in July in Houston during a power outage is not standard room temperature. Heat accelerates medication degradation. Knowing this before the power goes out is worth far more than discovering it afterward. A properly stocked first aid kit is not emergency paranoia. It is the equivalent of knowing where the spare tire is before you have a flat. Except that the flat may happen in the dark 3 days from now, when every urgent care clinic in the area is operating on reduced capacity. Number 4 is lighting that you can actually use. Candles are romantic. They are also a fire hazard. The 2003 Northeast Blackout produced dozens of residential fires in New York City as people lit candles to see and accidentally ignited curtains, furniture, and papers. The NFPA has documented that home fires spike during extended power outages in direct proportion to candle use. Candles are not a preparedness tool. They are a last resort. What actually works is layered lighting. This means 3 things operating together. The first layer is a rechargeable LED lantern, not a flashlight, a lantern. A flashlight requires you to hold it. A lantern sits on a surface and fills a room. LED models produce far more light per hour of battery than incandescent models ever did, and many of them recharge via USB, meaning your car can power them. A good LED camping lantern on medium setting can run for 40 to 60 hours on a single charge, depending on the model. The second layer is headlamps, 1 per person who will be navigating in the dark. This includes children old enough to use them. A headlamp frees your hands, which matters when you are cooking, when you are helping someone in the bathroom, when you are carrying something at 2 in the morning. Headlamps with fresh lithium batteries hold their charge significantly longer than those with alkaline batteries in cold conditions. Important for anyone in a northern climate facing a winter outage. The third layer is battery organization. Extra batteries stored in a sealed bag with each device, not loose in a drawer, organized and ready to be swapped. The single most frustrating experience people report in extended outages is finding batteries that do not match the device, are corroded, or were assumed to be fresh, and were not. Testing your batteries twice a year. A common recommendation is to do it when you change your smoke detector batteries. Eliminates this failure mode entirely. One more thing on this. Darkness is not just an inconvenience on day 3. Sleep disruption from unmanaged light environments. Too dark to navigate safely. Too bright from improvised sources to sleep. Compounds the anxiety and physical stress of an extended outage in ways that are real and documented. A lantern set to low in a shared room allows the household to maintain something close to a normal evening rhythm. That matters more than most people expect until they are in it. Number 3 is stored food that requires no cooking and no refrigeration. This is where it gets specific. Not just any food. Not the stuff in the back of the cabinet that you have not touched in 2 years. Not canned goods that technically work, but that no one in the household will actually eat when they are cold, stressed, and tired. On day 3. Real, non-refrigerated outage food has 3 properties. It has calories dense enough to sustain energy without large volumes. It requires no preparation or minimal preparation. No stove, no microwave, no heat source that depends on utilities. and it is something your household will actually eat, including children, without a fight. The specific items that professionals and disaster researchers consistently identify as the highest value shelf-stable foods for a power outage are nut butter, particularly peanut butter, which provides protein, fat, and calories in a compact form and requires nothing but a spoon. Crackers and shelf-stable flatbreads, canned fish, particularly tuna and salmon packed in water, canned beans, shelf-stable whole grains like oats that can be eaten with cold water in a pinch, dried fruit, nuts, and granola bars with meaningful protein content, not just sugar. The USDA's guidelines on food safety during power outages establish a critical threshold. A refrigerator keeps food safe for approximately 4 hours without power if the door stays closed. A full freezer stays safe for approximately 48 hours. A half-full freezer, about 24 hours. After those windows, perishable food is in the danger zone, between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, where bacteria doubles roughly every 20 minutes. This means, by day 3, everything in your refrigerator is gone. Everything in a half-full freezer is probably gone. The food that remains is shelf-stable food, and if you have not stored it deliberately, if you are relying on what happened to be in the pantry when the power went out, what you have may not be enough, may not be what your family will eat, or may be impossible to open without the can opener from number 8. The detail about children here is important and underappreciated. Children under stress become highly specific about food. This is not a discipline issue. It is a neurological one, documented in pediatric emergency care literature. Familiar, preferred foods reduce cortisol responses in children during stressful events in ways that calorically equivalent, but unfamiliar foods do not. Having peanut butter crackers, known granola bars, familiar canned fruit, the exact things your children normally eat, is not indulgence. It is strategic. It reduces one source of household stress at the exact moment when you need to reduce all of them. Number 2 is the ability to stay warm or stay cool. This one is the most location-specific item on this list, and also the one with the highest consequences when it goes wrong. For winter outages, the temperature inside an unheated home in a northern climate follows the outside temperature on roughly a 12 to 24-hour lag. This means that if it is 20 degrees outside and your power has been out for 36 hours, the inside of your home may be approaching 50 degrees or lower, depending on insulation. The 1998 January ice storm that hit Quebec and the northeastern United States, one of the most damaging in North American history, left more than 3 million people without power for days, and in some rural areas, weeks. 14 people died directly from the cold. Hypothermia does not require extreme temperatures to be dangerous. It begins at core body temperatures just a few degrees below normal. Layering wool and synthetic insulation, not cotton, which loses its insulating properties when damp, is the starting point. Emergency mylar blankets, which reflect up to 90% of body heat and weigh almost nothing, are the second line. Designating a single small room of the house as the warm room and sealing doorways with blankets to contain body heat is the approach emergency management agencies consistently recommend for sheltering in place during winter outages. Sleeping together in layers in a single room is not a worst-case scenario. It is a known, effective, low-cost response. For summer outages, the calculation is different and, in some ways, more urgent. Heat illness does not wait as long to become dangerous as cold does. During Hurricane Beryl in Houston, temperatures rose into the low 90s with a heat index near or above 100. Cooling centers were opened at libraries and community centers across Harris County. The people who fared best were those who knew where those centers were before they needed them and had the means to get there. For families staying in place during summer heat, the practical interventions are ice and coolers for temperature management, wet towels for cooling, battery-powered fans, which can lower perceived temperature significantly even without air conditioning, and timing. Being outside or active only in the early morning or at night, not during peak heat hours. The CDC's guidance on heat illness specifies that those over 65, infants, and anyone with cardiovascular conditions are at highest risk during heat exposure without climate control, and that these groups require dedicated attention, not just general household adjustments. A battery-powered or hand crank fan costs around $30. In Houston in July, on day 3 of a blackout, with the heat index at 100 degrees, that $30 fan becomes one of the most important things in a house with children. Number 1 is a household emergency plan that actually exists, not in someone's head, not as a general intention, an actual written plan that every adult and older child in the household knows, can locate, and can execute when there is no cell signal, no internet, no ability to look anything up, and the stress level in the house is high enough that clear thinking is harder than it normally would be. This is the item that cannot be purchased. It is the one that takes an evening to build and requires nothing but paper, a pen, and a conversation with the people you live with. And it is the item that has the most consistently documented impact on household outcomes during extended emergencies. The research on this is not abstract. The University of Delaware Disaster Research Center, one of the longest-running academic institutions in the country dedicated to studying how communities and households respond to disasters, has documented repeatedly that preparedness planning at the household level is among the highest leverage interventions for disaster outcomes. Not the gear, not the supply stockpile, though those matter. The plan. What does an actual emergency plan contain? It contains the out-of-area contact, a single person outside your region, a relative, a friend, a trusted contact, whose number every member of your household is memorized or written down, because local calls are often harder to complete during a regional emergency than calls to someone out of state. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has documented this pattern across multiple disasters. The out-of-area contact is how families coordinate when local networks are jammed. It contains your reunion point. If you cannot reach home and you cannot reach each other by phone, where do you go? This needs to be specific, not the community center, but a specific address and a specific backup address if the first is unavailable. It contains your go or stay decision framework. Under what conditions does your household evacuate? And under what conditions do you shelter in place? This decision, made in advance with a specific threshold, removes the paralysis that affects households who are trying to reason through an unfamiliar situation under high stress with incomplete information. Families who made this decision in advance of Hurricane Beryl were in motion immediately. Families who were still deciding on day 2 were still in their homes when the heat became dangerous. It contains the location of your important documents, insurance cards, identification, prescription information, emergency contacts for medical providers, in a sealed waterproof pouch, somewhere every adult in the house knows. And it contains the one thing that is harder to document, but perhaps the most important. A shared understanding of who is responsible for what, who checks on the neighbors, who handles the medications, who is in charge of the children if both adults need to do something at the same time, who has the car keys. In a disaster, the households that function best are not necessarily the best supplied ones. They are the ones where the people inside them have already had the conversation. In Houston, after Hurricane Beryl, what the Texas Tribune documented over and over was not a failure of supplies. It was a failure of preparation and a failure of systems. Centerpoint Energy had no clear communication plan. Residents had no clear household plan. People were making decisions in real time, in the dark, in 90-degree heat, without any prior framework for what to do next. The people who came through it with the least suffering were the people who already knew what they were doing before the storm hit. This is the thing that still matters after 72 hours without power, not because it solves the physical problems, the water, the food, the light, but because it is the thing that helps you solve them. Without it, each of the other 8 items on this list is still reactive. You are still improvising. You are still looking at your family in a dark room and wondering what to do next. With it, you already know the pattern across every major extended outage in the United States, the 2003 Northeast Blackout, Winter Storm Uri, Hurricane Beryl, the 1998 ice storm in the Northeast, is the same. The difference between households that were uncomfortable and households that were in genuine danger was rarely about income, rarely about location, and rarely about luck. It was almost always about preparation that happened before anyone expected to need it. FEMA recommends a minimum of 72 hours of self-sufficiency. Based on what has actually happened in every major disaster since Hurricane Katrina, they now recommend 2 weeks. The gap between those two numbers is where most people currently live. You do not have to close that gap all at once. You do not have to buy everything this week. But the manual can opener, the water, the cash, the radio, the first aid kit, those are not expensive and they are not complicated. What they require is a decision made now, before the next time the lights go out and do not come back on by morning. The items on this list are not about fear. They are about options. The families who had them in Houston in July 2024 had choices. The families who did not were waiting to be told what to do next. The best time to prepare is before the shelves have already told you that everyone else had the same idea at the same time. And if you want to take this further, if the pantry itself is the next conversation, the one about long-term shelf-stable food systems that stretch well beyond a 3-day window, that is exactly where we are going next.